Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Donna Fiesel, and I'm your host of Afternoon Drive Home on IC in Christ Radio. We're your source for news and entertainment. You can find us on television, channel 182, on Charter Communications, as well as worldwide on Abundant TV, found on Roku, Apple TV, and Amazon Fire. And we're also in Australia. I don't know that I let Alan Mendenhall know that, but it's a huge Christian network and it's in Australia. So they asked the owner of Abundant TV if he would be interested in having us aired there. And he goes, "Oh, are you kidding?" Yes. So we are in Australia right now. So thank you, everybody who listens. I know you could be doing anything else right now, but you're watching us. We definitely appreciate that. I have a very special friend with me right now. His name is Alan Mendenhall. And Alan, you carry such a large business card. You want to go ahead and tell everybody everything you do, and let's get started.
Well, I guess chiefly I am the Associate Dean of the Sorrell College of Business at Troy University and Executive Director of the Manuel H. Johnson Center for Political Economy within the business school. So those are the two titles that I have at Troy, and of course I do other things too. But that's mainly what I do.
Well, you're an author and a speaker. You're also a talk show host. And
That's
so,
right.
yeah,
I
and I try
sometimes
to
forget
catch you as much as I
that.
can. So we love having you on the show. So let's go ahead and get started because you've been working on a project lately, and I've caught clips of it. So let's talk about that. Anti-woke.
Sure. Yeah, so the program we've launched is called the Free Enterprise Scholars Program, and it began in August of this year. And it's being characterized as anti-woke, and that's sort of the negative take on it. But the positive take is that we're pro sound ethical business practice. This is just a traditional business ethics program for undergraduates. We have a robust master's program for econ students, and we have generous donors who fully fund anyone who comes into our master's program. And in fact, we pay you to go through the program because the students end up being graduate assistants. And so you get paid to go through our program. But we had nothing really special for undergraduates, and we were trying to figure out what we could do for them. And my colleague Dan Sutter and I believe Dan's been on your show one time, but Dan Sutter and I both read Vivek Ramaswamy's Woke Inc. over the course of the summer and started talking about it and decided we could develop an entire curricular program around that book. Now, this program is not for course credit. It's entirely extracurricular, and we give scholarships for it. And we right now are just offering $500 a semester, but we are talking to several donors who want to increase that scholarship amount. So we're hoping to really surprise the students. I don't know if it's going to be much of a surprise if I'm sitting here talking about it on air, but we're hoping to surprise the students in the spring with sort of a big scholarship that they weren't expecting. But we're chiefly going after sort of the onset of wokeness in corporate America. Now, people have trouble with that term because as it was originally conceived, it meant sort of an awareness of systemic racial injustices in this country. And that is undeniable that exists and that those existed and that those are problems. However, the term has a sort of particular meaning now as it's developed in the context of corporate America, and it really refers to the way that major corporations are exercising their unprecedented powers to play in in politics. So you've probably heard the term ESG, and ESG is sort of the new thing. It's been around actually for 20 years, but it's only within the last few months that sort of the general public is waking up to the reality of what ESG is. And simply stated, ESG seems harmless. It just stands for environmental, social, and governance. And so it is a framework that corporations can use in order to regulate their business. However, it developed in the context of investment by asset management firms and by investors. And it was conceived by Kofi Annan in the UN many years ago. And it is sort of global in scope. And you have ESG actually instituted into regulations in Europe, and it's beginning to happen here in the United States, and it's causing a lot of problems. So, for example, the E environment would be if companies wish to invest in, instead of investing in what typically would yield the most returns on investment, which is what you would
Mhm.
think, like
Yeah.
they're investing in companies, they screen out companies that don't have sort of sufficient ESG criteria. So let's say you're investing my money, Donna. You're an asset manager,
Mhm.
and I give you my money, and I give it to you with the expectation that you're going to put it in funds and build a portfolio for me that's going to generate the most returns on my investment, because that's the whole point. Well, you are going to take my money, and rather than doing it in that way, you're going to invest that money in sort of socially favorable causes. So you're not going to invest in fossil fuels. You're not going to invest in in anything that's sort of politically discredited, anything involving firearms, for example, or things like that. And the problem is what you're trying to do is maximize the effects of that particular industry, because that industry is not going to yield the most returns on investment. But you're sort of banking on the fact that if if I and all the other investors start investing our money this way, we can artificially inflate the importance of this industry and really damage those other industries that we don't like. And this has been happening in Europe for a long time. It's beginning to happen in the United States,
Mhm.
but it has sort of unforeseeable consequences. And they say unforeseeable. It seems pretty foreseeable. You would think that you would foresee energy problems, but what's happened in Europe is now, as Europe has cut back on its energy, it has become reliant on Russia and China and Saudi Arabia and countries that really aren't their friends.
Mhm.
And guess what happened when Russia, Ukraine started fighting, and now Europe is in an energy crunch? They have no one to rely on. They've basically um, hollowed out
Uh,
ener- their energy industry, and the cost of electricity have skyrocketed. The cost of gas has skyrocketed. It's all compounded by inflation. And now Europe's stuck with this dependence on Russia and China, neither of whom are European allies, and they're in a tough spot. They're going to be people in Europe, advanced world, who can't turn the lights on this winter.
mhm. That's going to be really rough. And let me ask you a question about this because I'm thinking a common sense approach to my business.
Yeah,
Okay. So what it really boils down to me is if you sell widgets, I would rather put my money in the inventory of widgets than an idea. The
yeah,
idea, especially if it's something because you're eliminating about half of, I mean, this is just boots on the ground information right here. So the
yeah.
folks I speak with are not going to buy from some of these companies because of that. So what's
Mhm.
happened? I mean, is that not the common sense approach to it? Because I
Well,
want to sell my widgets to everybody, whether they
yeah.
agree with my ideology or not. I want everyone as a customer.
Well, and here's what's happening to these companies, and here's one reason why they're drifting in this political direction. And I don't want to say it's not their fault, but to some extent, this is pressure being exerted on them. So these big asset management companies, BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard, they got incredibly wealthy. I mean, they're managing together $40 trillion worth of assets. I mean, we're talking astronomical wealth on a planetary scale. And they got very wealthy investing state pension money. So all these people that are expecting to, their money to be invested in something that's yielding return, like they don't understand that the people that are directing the state pension funds are investing in these ESG screened funds. But at any rate, these companies have gotten incredibly wealthy, and rather than divesting from companies that they think are politically disfavored, fossil fuels or whatever, they continue to invest in them, but they are buying more and more shares. So they become major owners of these companies. And then they exercise their proxy power to push boards of directors to the left. So they're getting their own people on the board, and they're exerting influence over the board, So now you have, say some company owns 16% of the shares of Disney. That's a lot. That's a lot of Disney ownership. And they're able to sort of push Disney in a direction that they want it to go in a political direction they want to go in. And so Disney is just, their executives only have so much control over that. A CEO reports to the board. In terms of strategy, for the left, this is brilliant. I mean, it is absolutely brilliant. Is it ethical? No, it's not ethical. You are breaching fiduciary duty. You're using other people's money who don't consent to these politics, who don't agree with these politics. You're using their money to push leftward politics through corporate America. And it is astounding that you've got these asset managers that are more powerful than even, several of the publicly, traded funds on
Is
the New
that
York Stock
not what
Exchange.
Bernie Murdoff? Was that his name?
Madoff, yeah, he's
I
got
mean,
kind of
is
a
that
Ponzi
not what he
scheme.
went to prison for?
Well, he was, yeah, well, it's a little
Something
different.
like that.
Yeah, he had a Ponzi scheme in which he was getting people to invest money, and he didn't really have any product at the end, and he was just building up wealth. But it's
Same deal though.
in
This is using someone's money for a
exactly in terms of the principle, the unethical principle. You're exactly right. You are investing somebody else's money in ways they did not consent to, and in ways they don't like, and getting incredibly wealthy in the process, and controlling U.S. politics in the process. So it used to be we didn't have these institutional investors for decades and decades. Most people were just individual investors, like someone like you or someone like me, and we're buying a stock. I might buy a stock of Home Depot and see what it does. Well, we didn't have these institutional investors who are, investing state pension monies into different funds, and we're talking astronomical amounts of money when you're doing that. It's not just one person, it's several, you know, thousands and tens of thousands of people whose retirement is getting invested by these institutional investors. And so it's taken things to a whole new level in terms of the money at stake and the power that can be exerted over the
uh,
market. It's incredible.
but what happens to your Disneys and your Coca-Cola companies when they're not seeing profits anymore? I mean, they're going to be abandoned by the same people who are getting rich off of them.
Well, ideally, if people were alive to these maneuvers, then people would say, all right, we're going to boycott the business. And that's happened. Starbucks launched some sort of, I forget what sort of woke campaign it was, but it had a major backlash, and
Yep.
Starbucks sales went down for 2 weeks or whatever. But that was 2 weeks, and then it was done. People forgot about it. People moved on. What you're starting to see is some backlash in some really creative ways. Like there's a guy named David Black, a very wealthy man in Tennessee. He's created a company called Second Vote, and they have a partner company called Second Vote Advisors, and they're both separate. Second Vote Advisors has an algorithm that goes through and identifies companies that aren't just conservative, but that don't play in politics to the left. So if you're apolitical, you're okay. You'll be in their fund. So they screen out funds. They're asset management. They're going to invest your money, but they're going to invest it in companies that refuse to play this political game. Strive Asset Management, Vivek Ramaswamy came up with that, and what they're doing is a similar thing, but they're also going in and buying major shares of companies, just like the BlackRock's, Vanguard, State Streets, and they're telling their boards of directors, look, all we are proxies. The owners of the company are these thousands and thousands of people whose money has been, being invested in these funds, and we're going to tell you as proxies that you should not be voting this way or pushing things to the left or whatever. And so it's going to be a game of, who's going to own more shares in the company, right or left. And this is in some ways a disturbing trend because it's the politicization of everything. You can't just buy a shaving razor anymore. You got to say like, oh, is this shaving razor the company that like is woke, or is this shaving razor the company that's just normal? Like,
Uh-huh.
and that's how you got to buy every product now. There's patriotic coffee. They're now banking institutions. So one very, very, very scary thing about ESG that I referred to earlier is it's being adopted in the financial services industry, and they're developing something along the lines of social credit scores like you have in China, where China, it's a surveillance culture. You jaywalk across the street, just like you have a credit score. If you have a bad social credit score, boom, you jaywalk, you're down. But this ESG is, if you go in for a loan, let's say you're just a hometown farmer or whatever, and you go to get a loan and the bank says, "Oh, I'm sorry, but your ESG score is not very high." You say, "What? What do you mean?" It's like, "Well, we're looking at your bylaws and we don't see anything about diversity, equity, and inclusion in here."
Mhm.
Like, well, it's just me and my family. We were, yeah, but it's not in your, but you need to include some kind of diversity statement here. And if it's just your family, well, your family are all sort of white farmers from rural Alabama. You need to diversify. You need to get more people on the board, or else we're not going to give you a loan. And this is all an effort to control, um, basically control politics on a mass scale, where people who have conservative views aren't going to be able to bank in a certain institution. They're not going to be able to get loans. They're not going to be able to use credit cards. So you're now seeing some people waking up to this and trying to develop a parallel financial services structure for conservatives. But it's a long haul because these banks have been around a long time. And this guy that developed a new conservative bank in Texas just failed. Now we'll learn a lot about his failure because little things like the credit cards he developed were like patriotic themed, and that was really neat. But the way the card was created, it interfered with the chip, so you couldn't get the chip to work, and so that costs a lot of money to repair and things like that. Look, those are easy mistakes that someone else won't make in the future because some
Mhm.
entrepreneur went out and tried and failed and gave everybody else a lot of information from which to work. But it's sort of bizarre to see these parallel economies
Yeah.
developing.
But you
And
know something, I still see it failing. I just,
yeah,
because when you start taking power away from the common man, and the common man sees it, no, we're kind of quiet. We don't say
well,
a whole lot at first. We hope that people like that will shut up and go away, but they're not going to. This is when revolutions start.
you're
Uh,
exactly right, and that's
so
why the common people need to wake up to what's going on because people don't know, and I'm just as guilty as everyone else. When I started looking into this and figuring out what was happening and reading Vivek Ramaswamy's book and started studying asset management investment, I started realizing, oh my gosh, how was I not seeing this? I had no idea. And not only is it taking power away from the common man and putting it in these major investment firms,
mhm.
but it's also putting it in Russia and China. We are basically arming Russia and China. We are giving them all the power, and it's people in our country, in corporate America, doing it at the expense of all the rest of us. And if it doesn't stop, we're doomed. We're
It,
just
it, it
doomed.
has to stop. That's why this election is so, so important. I wanted to mention something else because you have been on Fox News. Let's talk about that for a minute. That's pretty awesome. I'm so proud of you.
Well, thanks. Yeah, it was really cool. It was really fun. And it was right after we announced this program. When we first announced the program, and we sort of talked about how it was anti woke, we got some attention from local media. We got 3 or 4 stories, but then a publication called The College Fix, which reports specifically on university news, picked up on the story and ran it. And as soon as they did it, everything went viral. And within 2 hours, I got contacted by a Fox News producer, um, somebody that is with Fox News Digital who asked me to write an op-ed, and a Fox Business reporter who wanted to run a story on the program. So I had to talk to this reporter for Fox Business. He ran a story on the program. The producer had me coming on Fox and Friends the next day, and I was in Guatemala. I was in Guatemala on business, and so I had to get up at 4 in the morning and get on the television show at 4 a.m. And in fact, I had to reconfigure my entire hotel room, Donna. It was, to get it in compliance with what their tech standards were. I had to put little lamps on either side of my laptop, and it still wasn't bright enough. So I had to remove the lampshades until I got it to where they were pleased with the sufficient brightness. Unfortunately, there was like a painting behind me that was like a sketch of like a Greek god or something, and it was a nude. So there's like this nude male Greek god behind me. And I was like, you know what?
Get
I
rid
can't
of
go on.
it.
Yeah, it's like I can't go on Fox News with that behind me. So I just took that down,
Mhm.
like moved all the furniture. By the time it was done, my hotel room was entirely reconfigured, which meant that as soon as I got off, I had to go back and reconfigure,
Mhm.
put everything back where it belonged. But totally worth it. It was really, really neat and a fun experience. It went by so fast. I don't even know how long I was on there, 3 minutes maybe. But man,
But it was
three
a
minutes
huge
goes by.
impact. That was a huge
Huge
impact.
impact. Yeah, that's the thing. You go on Fox News for 3 minutes, and now I have people from all over the country and even other countries reaching out to me, asking about this program. And this is a small, modest program, and but there's so much more that we're going to do with it
Yeah.
now, and so much more that's coming from this because we took a stand and we were bold, and no other university program is willing to do that, and we had the courage to do it, and we're going to reap the benefits while
Mhm.
all these other universities continue to drift farther to the left. We're going to embrace principles that we know are true and right, and we're going to capitalize on it and do things that the other universities can't because a left wing university is a dime a dozen. They're all left. What really is going to make you stand out? Becoming another left wing university? No, you're just going to fail like all the other universities that are starting to drop and fail because there's an enrollment crisis, international students aren't coming, there's birth rate decline. So as all these colleges begin to close because they think that what you're supposed to do is be like everyone else, we're going to thrive. At least our program is, because we're saying we don't want to be like everyone else. That model's failing. We're going to be distinct and we're going to do something bold and courageous and right. And
Well,
so we're
it's
going to,
refreshing not to be led around by the nose.
yeah.
That's why I do what I do. I love. First of all, I believe in being a conservative. I would not be
Mm-hmm,
able to work for one of the big networks ever. That
mm-hmm.
wouldn't last a day. I promise you. I'd either walk or
Yeah.
they'd kick me out. It'd be one of the two. This is free. This is total freedom right here. And I like freedom and I love promoting freedom. Let me ask you about something else. And this is when people are buying gold certificates.
Mm-hmm.
It's not gold that you can put in your hand. It's a
Yeah.
gold that's going to collapse someday.
Yeah. I mean, I don't see much of distinction. I don't know a lot about this, so I don't want to talk uh, about something I don't particularly know well, but that sounds a lot like what fiat currency already is. We got
Right.
gold in Fort Knox. This paper currency is supposed to be backed by something, and we're not on the gold standard anymore.
Uh,
But in theory, that's what currency is supposed to be backed by some sort of
but I
permanent
don't
metal,
trust
something
that. I
sure.
don't trust it.
Well, and it's not now, and that's the problem. It's almost more backed by military might because we're in debt to many, many different countries,
Mm-hmm.
and what stops them from calling the debt and saying, you got to pay up? Well, basically our military might and our power on the global stage. That's it. But if you lose that, then what's going to stop them from saying, all right, time for you to pay up, pay what you owe?
Mm-hmm. I
And
mean,
we
nothing
owe.
can stop it. Nothing. Because
Yeah.
we've already seen references to that already. I mean, you don't agree with President Trump, and they've been after him for. I mean, it's unreal. I mean, first of all, if they had something on him, it would have happened before he became president of the United States. They've been
Yeah.
digging like crazy, and there's just nothing to it. Nothing.
Yeah, it's a shame to see the federal government weaponized in this way, especially the Department of Justice. It's frightening precedent to set because that means that no matter who the administration is, right, left, conservative, Democrat, whatever, someone's going to come in there and weaponize that federal apparatus against the other side, and that's not what the Department of Justice is for.
Mm-hmm.
And fortunately, we still live in sort of a 50-50 society, we'll put it that way, where half the states are red, half the states are blue. But can you imagine if there's a shift to 80-20 and someone takes control of that and they start prosecuting people that run conservative talk shows? What happens when they're going after you? Then they say, I don't care what it is, find something. And
Mm-hmm.
they
It's
drum up some
dangerous.
sort
It's
of,
a dangerous thing. I
it's
mean,
a
I'm already
dangerous thing.
seeing. I'm already seeing that because I've been kicked off of YouTube. I don't know how many times, and I think
Yeah.
they're giving me like one more warning. Facebook has kicked me off. I mean, and I'm just a small fish in the pond. I'm not
Yeah.
that big,
It's
and
it's crazy, isn't it?
it's nuts. But I'm taking screenshots of every bit of that. I have an attorney who's collecting all of that.
Good, you should. And we should be developing an alternative to YouTube. And, it's going to be a long run, but we're going to have to partner with other people throughout Europe that are also pushing back. There are not enough of us in our country. Sadly, the United States of America is farther left than the rest of the world, farther left than Europe. You can look at the most recent Italian election to see how far to the left we've drifted. Emmanuel Macron in France and his education minister announced less than a year ago, it was November of last year, that they were looking into ways to diminish the influence of American universities on French universities. They said these Americans and their identity politics and their left wing ideas are corrupting our French institutions. Now, keep in mind, this is a French socialist saying that America is too far left for France. In what world are the Americans corrupting the French? God, that is how far left we've gone. And I'll tell you what, China is not going woke. Russia is not going woke. And if we don't change course, we will lose, and it will be deserved. We'll deserve to lose.
Is this how we're being destroyed from within?
Yes, it
Khrushchev's
is.
mentioned that, the
It
America will
absolutely
be
is.
destroyed from within.
We are now being controlled by left wing ideologues who are peddling identity politics, and it's a very anti-intellectual wokeness. It is not something that's, sort of the left-wing politics of the 60s where people were reading profound books and texts, and they were trying to push things in a turn. This is actually an anti-intellectual. We will not hear another point of view. We will silence our critics. We
Mhm.
will use as much power as possible to silence people. We don't believe in the past. We are all about wrong side of history, wrong side of history. We're looking to the future. Well, guess what? If you don't learn the past, you don't know what direction to go in the future. And there's this notion that sort of the United States of America, the only important history is from like the 1960s on. And everything that happened in the founding is just dismissed as, okay, that was a slave owning era. Well, let me tell you, the politics are far more complex than that.
Mhm.
And the power plays and the struggles and politics and the international relations are far more complex than sort of the dismissive attitude we have on the left would like to believe. And it's a frightening thing. These young people who think that they are out there changing the world, doing good, are being used by a small group of elites, and they're being brainwashed, and they are destroying the country. And you know, if this is what our country becomes, then our country deserves to lose. I mean, if it's no longer going to adhere to the qualities and characteristics that made it a great place, that made it one of the best countries, nations, geographical territories ever to have existed on the face of the earth in human history. If it's going to reject all that, well, then it deserves to
And
not
so
be
be it. I
exist.
mean, that's the way it'll be. We actually grew this country on core beliefs. I'm talking about biblical beliefs.
Yeah,
And all that stuff is going away. And you're bullied to the extent is if you speak up, oh, you're against going forward. Actually, we're going backward. We're not going forward at all.
yeah. No, that's right. We're going backwards. And this sort of old Whig theory of history, that history is just an inexorable unfolding of progress and that you always advance, is absurd, because how many empires have we seen decline? I mean, it's not just Rome. We've
Got to
seen the
Venezuela.
Ottoman Empire decline. We've seen China rise and fall. We've seen, obviously, in our recent time, we've seen countries that embrace socialism like Venezuela that just collapsed entirely. The former Soviet Union collapsed entirely, and we've seen how China, in order to avoid that, started adopting all these market-friendly approaches, because they said, "Look, we can't be actually communist. We can be fascist and totalitarian in regulating our people, but we can't embrace communist economics because it doesn't work." And at least they realized it. Unfortunately for us, they did.
Mhm.
But Egypt was the world's probably strongest power ever,
Mhm.
at least for longevity, in terms of longevity. And what is Egypt today? It's not irrelevant, but it's not really a big player. We know that there are declines. Even the Western world, after the fall of the Roman Empire, think about how long it took the Western world to develop plumbing and aqueducts and architecture of the same scale and magnitude that existed in Rome. It took a long time to get back to that and levels of sophistication. And there were shifts. The the Arabic world started developing new math and science, and was really the sort of enlightenment before the Enlightenment. And so we know that history isn't just not the inevitable unfolding in stages of advancement. There are periods of digression, regression, and it's not always a forward progress, so to speak. So I hate to see it, but we're in trillions of dollars of debt. Biden has contributed an additional $6 trillion worth of debt to our debt levels. We are wokeifying our military. We are a weakening player on the global stage.
We're
Chinese
being
leaders,
laughed at. We're being
we're
laughed
being
at.
laughed at. Joe Biden is our president. I mean, who honestly takes the guy seriously? Even people on the left don't take him seriously. We are becoming a laughingstock, and it's sort of pitiful.
We most certainly are. Let's go ahead and cut into a commercial break. We'll be right back in just a couple of minutes. You hang in there, okay? And by
All
the way,
right.
you can go ahead and take yourself off of the video if you'd like. And then as soon as we come back, put yourself back on there. We'll be right back
Okay.
in just a minute. We're back. My name is Donna Thiesel, and I'm your host of Afternoon Drive Home on IC Radio in the town of Geraldine, Alabama. Thank you again so much for watching every day, Monday through Friday. Beginning at 1 o'clock, you'll see The Edge with Donna and Kathy. And then right after that, you will find us Afternoon Drive Home. So again, thank you so much for watching. Again, every day, Monday through Friday. You can find us several different ways. Local in North Alabama, you can find us on channel 182, and that's on Charter Communications. Worldwide, you can find us on Abundant TV, which can be found on Roku, Apple TV, and Amazon Fire. You can even go back on Roku and look at some of our past shows. So we appreciate your staying with us. Have with me Alan Mendenhall, and Alan has been a guest on this show for years. And so we always enjoy having him once a month come in and talk about some of the projects he's working on. But I wanted to show this to you right here and focus on the moral, okay? Free markets, moral free markets. So let's talk just for a few minutes about free market and what that's
Sure.
all about. Alan Mendenhall.
Well, free markets, simply put, are markets that operate in the absence of government coercion, government intervention, and government control. It's letting people buy and exchange and trade without any sort of intervention. Now, the government, of course, has a role in a purely free market for the enforcement of contracts and for the resolution of disputes, which will inevitably arise. But the government ought not to tinker in everyday transactions and ought to the extent possible, let the free flow of goods and services take place. Mm-hmm. If it were to do that, everybody would be able to prosper. Trading would be freed up. We would exchange, and the prices of goods and services would go down so that more people would have access to them, so that poor people would have access to better goods, higher standard of living. And in the meantime, all of society would get wealthier and better, and the quality of living, the standard of life would improve. And that's generally how things go. Now, we don't live in a perfect world. We don't live in a utopia in which all these things exist. So there are many different factors that sort of in the non-theoretical world get thrown in there, political factors, other factors. You don't like to trade with countries that commit human rights violations, for example, and things like that. So um, um, there are many different things to consider. We're talking about private individuals and companies trading. Are we talking about governments trading with other governments? But at any rate, in general, countries that have the freest markets also tend to have the freest societies, the higher levels of happiness, higher standard of living, more access to medicine, more access to healthcare, um, and longer lifespans and everything else. So, and they also tend to be countries that don't go to war with each other. If the
Hmm.
countries become trading partners, they don't fight. They'd rather trade with each other and get what they need in exchange for what they need, then they would go to war with each other. The countries that are the most repressive, that that abuse their people, that commit human rights violations, also tend to have very closed economies. So I don't think there's a coincidence there.
I don't either. And it's just a simple word, and it seems to be a dirty word anymore, and it's called freedom.
Mm-hmm.
Freedom to be able to
Freedom.
choose. Yeah.
Yeah.
And freedom to be able to make mistakes and learn from the mistakes, and then they prosper us later. Because I mean, we've seen over and over throughout history. I mean, how many times that Lincoln, President Lincoln, I mean, he made one foul up after another. I mean, it was just over
Mm-hmm.
and over again, but he learned from those mistakes. And I think taking away that freedom is what's causing harm here in the United States. What are your
Yeah.
thoughts?
Oh, there's so much to say on that. We tend to overregulate virtually every industry. The barriers to entry are almost prohibitive for many people. If they want to enter into some kind of industry, well, they are required to get a degree, or they're required to get a license, or they're required to get a certificate. And then to advance throughout the degree, they have to get this, that, and the other. Well, these things really aren't training us. What they're doing is they're enriching the people that are regulating. They've got accreditors, and the accreditors are making money. And you know, all these different industries that add no value to society, that are getting wealthy off of regulation by prohibiting people from entering into business, from creating new things. We are stifling innovation, we are stifling competition, and we're getting poor quality goods and services because of that. We have more poverty than we should have because of that, and our economy is not as free as it could be because of that.
I totally agree with that. You know, there's a grand wizard in all of this. There may be several grand wizards, and they're the only ones I can see that are winning at this point. And what they do is they use people by keying in and really tampering with their emotions to find out what makes them work, what makes them ticked off, or what makes them grow. And anytime I have ever made a decision based on emotion, I have messed up every single time.
Yeah, yeah. I think, one sad thing to see is that people who are now in leadership positions, both in government but also in powerful organizations like major corporations,
Mhm.
have realized that stirring people into a frenzy, whipping people into a frenzy, playing to people's emotions really gets strong reactions.
Mhm.
And it mobilizes people into action. Unfortunately, it does not necessarily always mobilize us into action in constructive ways. I think it creates fracture and division in society. It politicizes things that ought not to be politicized. I mean, we're entering into Halloween season, and this Halloween there are all these new movements to have culturally inclusive Halloween, and costumes you can wear, costumes you can't wear. Are we afraid that fentanyl is being put into kids' candy? What kind of society are we living in when people are just terrified of trick or treating? It's frightening, and not without reason. That there are
Mhm.
bad people out there,
Mhm.
and it just seems as though the the rapidity of cultural decline is astounding, and it's like you can't put the brakes on it. There, what can you do to stop this?
Mhm.
And I increasingly see the country splintering along red state, blue state lines. I've seen states like Florida that were solidly blue moving red and redder,
Mhm.
and it includes diverse cultures and communities. It includes a lot of escapees from communism from Latin America, and and I see people developing sort of alternative parallel economies out of Texas. I see companies moving from blue states to red states, and I have a feeling that the future of this country is shifting to the red states,
I
and
think it is too. But I'll tell you something else. You mentioned Halloween. Well, the neat
mm,
thing about, and I'm going to say this, living in the South, I love living in the South. I really do. As long as you don't bring your crazy ideas when you move down here, we're okay with you moving from the north to the south. But I wanted to mention this is we always try to something happens, Halloween, for example. Well, so our churches around here are doing a lot of trunk or treats. They're
mhm,
safer, and the
yeah,
kids still get to go trick or. It's not like it used to be when I was a kid, when you could just go all over the entire neighborhood and
yeah,
bring
with
home
no
smacks of
supervision,
candy.
yeah.
but but it's, I mean, we would actually, my brother and sister and I would just walk all over the community. I grew up in Oxford, Alabama, and so we lived in subdivisions, and
Yeah.
everybody moved in subdivisions in the 60s and 70s. And so we would have to actually go home, unload our candy, and go back out again. There would be so much. Kids are missing out on so many things.
Oh, and you probably knew your neighbors. And these
Oh,
days, people don't
yeah,
know their neighbors. So if you're going to knock on a door across the street, you're basically knocking on a complete stranger's door. And
absolutely.
it's just it's a sad state. People have developed their virtual lives where they have their Facebook friends, and if they want to go interact with their Facebook friends, they do it every night. But they're not going to walk next door to their next door neighbor's house and have a glass of wine or
Mhm.
whatever.
Yeah, I
Shoot
mean,
the breeze,
it's
talk about
that way.
football.
You're afraid to. Now, in little Geraldine, Alabama, we do know our neighbors across the street. So Raj and Mary are absolutely awesome. We'd decide to go somewhere, they feed the animals for us,
Oh,
and
that's
so
awesome.
they're absolutely wonderful. But then in other parts of the country, it's not that way, and people are afraid to get out and know their neighbors. We moved to Charlotte, North Carolina. Phil took a job out there, and I actually hosted a talk show out there as well called The Woman's Edge. It was a lot of fun, but I
Wow.
didn't know my neighbors. And we moved in a little cul-de-sac, and it was in Charlotte, but it was in an awesome, awesome part of Charlotte. So I thought, food always brings people together. So it was the very first Thanksgiving. We moved there in July, around 4th of July. So it was the very first Thanksgiving. And my thoughts were, this is a small cul-de-sac. Only like 7 or 8 houses are here. We got to know each other. So I went on ahead and baked a bunch of cakes and took them to the neighbors. Told them I was from Alabama, that we always got together with food. And do you know, as far as I know, even right now, the neighbors all get along with each other and look out for each other.
Oh, wow.
That was
Yeah,
kind of cool.
that's the way it ought to be. And I like your comment about, having a church uh, alternative function, because that's where your communities are developing and are retained, and the families, the other kids there. And what was it that you called that?
Uh,
You
yeah,
called it
trunk is called a trunk or
trunk
treat.
or trunk or treat. Yeah.
And that's a pretty cool thing. You can feel safe with your kids, that,
Hmm.
and really I tell parents all, don't just turn your kids loose, not in today's world, not in
Yeah.
today's society. Don't drop your teenage daughters off at the mall and leave them.
Yeah.
You got to have some
Yeah.
kind of control there. So it's okay to be the mom and the dad and be the boss of the kids. I
Hmm.
wanted to ask you about something else. We've been talking about finances and that kind of thing. I've been doing a lot of research on flat tax and fair tax.
Hmm.
I don't know that it'll ever happen. I don't, because there are too many other people in control who could see that that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
You done any research on that?
Not a ton. I mean, I think, I mean, I like the idea of a tax with a single rate. And I sort of like the idea. I feel as if it's um, I feel as if it's never gonna pan out.
I think there are
You
too
know,
many politicians that would like to not see that happen.
well, that's exactly right. I know one of my favorite economists. So I tend to favor the Austrian School of Economics, but regardless, I'm very pleased to follow different sorts of free market economists. And I remember Milton Friedman in Capitalism and Freedom proposed something, a negative income tax, which was like a like a flat tax, and it had uh, personal deductions and allowed taxable income uh, to become negative and not have to get set at zero and things like that. But um, you know, it's it's interesting. I would like to see no taxes at all. I'm only kind of joking, but I think we're overtaxed. You know, you see teenagers when they first get their paychecks and they look at like, well, where'd all the money go? They give it, well, they're
You're in for a shock.
yeah, you're in for a shock. That's where the taxes
You
go.
have an old uncle called Uncle Sam that wants part of it.
Well, and it's gotten to the point where everyone thinks that the only jobs out there are government jobs, and in some ways that's kind of true in our state. You know, so many of the high-paying jobs are actually in government and not in industry, and that prevents us from being competitive. I mean, Alabama continues to rank poorly in economic freedom indices, even though we're a red state, even though our politicians pay lip service to markets, we don't actually practice what we preach, and we're fairly economically unfree, and we don't generate a lot of business. We don't have people coming to us the way they're going to Texas and Florida to create new businesses, and we're losing opportunities because of that. China's buying up a lot of our vacant land. I mean, I was talking to someone at Alpha recently about how much land China has bought here in Alabama, and that kind of stuff is pretty frightening.
It most certainly is. Do you have any idea exactly how? I mean, not exactly, but just kind of a ballpark figure of how much land they're buying in
I
Alabama?
don't. I don't. I would love to get that figure though. I would
You
love
know,
to get it.
sometimes in passing, and I know this sounds like Donna's got a tinfoil hat, but I'm
Yeah.
using logic here. So
Yeah.
sometimes I'm passing and I'm going through rural areas, because we cover a big area here in Alabama for the show and basically in the southeast. But even in Alabama, in Tennessee, and even in Georgia and Mississippi, you'll see maybe a mobile home
Mm-hmm.
out in the middle of a bunch of land somewhere with really nice gates. You know what I mean? So,
Interesting.
and it
Yeah.
makes you wonder, is this like, okay, the resale value of a mobile home is not much. And this mobile home has been here for several years, and the gate around it has been around for several years. It makes you wonder,
Yeah.
what's
And
that all about?
I have no idea. The sort of benign explanation might be that people use it as a hunting property and they go there.
But you never see anybody out there.
Yeah. I don't, well, that, I mean, I don't know, Donna. I really
Mhm.
don't, but I could see
You just
someone.
have to wonder about things,
Yeah,
and you have to be
sure.
alert, not to the point of being, a crazy
Sure.
conspiracy theorist. But I'll have to tell you, the folks that I used to think were crazy conspiracy theorists, I'm not so sure they're crazy.
Yeah. I mean, there's always something to the
There's
story.
some truth to what they say.
For, for people, it's I hesitate to use the term conspiracy because it has like a technical legal
Yeah,
meaning, but if you've ever worked for politicians, you do certain things like, okay, let's issue a press release on this so that it will distract the media and the media will latch onto this. Meanwhile, we have the space to go over here and do all this kind of stuff without the media knowing. I mean, that kind of stuff is just part of politics, and it's not a conspiracy, but
it's
it
happening.
is an attempt to control information and regulate how things, and that stuff happens every day, and not just on the big national level, but on little local levels too. I mean, that's just how
Sure
things
does.
operate. And so, while I wouldn't call that conspiracy, it does suggest that there's a lot more to a lot of the stories we hear. I mean, I can remember just practicing law. We as in our firm, it wasn't a case I had, but we were collecting debts from somebody who owed a lot of money to her client, and some local news station ran this story. The lady was a very, very, very pretty young lady, and I think the reporter was this young guy that was trying to be like hero. I'm going to go save the damsel in distress. I'm going to
Yeah.
show off to this lady. And he ran this story about, oh, the big bad collections agency and this big bad collections work is doing all this stuff and trying to get this. Well, she owed these people money. I mean, what are you supposed to do? Like, she's the one that's not paying somebody that she has agreed to pay. Like, this is not
Uh-huh.
this is not some nefarious thing, but the media made it sound like it was this horrible thing. And so, even in local stories, you don't always get exactly the truth. I mean, people lie. Sadly, the media lies.
Really? They really
Yeah,
do?
they
Yeah, they
lie.
really, they really do. And let me tell you something. I learned this a long time ago. So I had a business in Anniston, Alabama, a few years ago, and so one of my clients was an attorney there, and he and I became really good friends. So I was at his office one day, and he said his daughter was just drop dead gorgeous. I mean, she
Mm,
was a model. I'm talking
mm,
New York style model, and so it was not well known. But I
yeah,
was in his office, and he said, "I said she just never takes a bad picture, does she?" Never a bad photo. And he said, yeah, let me show you something. And by the way, he's a conservative guy.
yeah,
He said, this will give you a lesson right here on how they run ads for politicians. Okay. They can make one look bad with a photo. And he said,
yeah,
I'm going to let you look at this book. And this is one day she spent at the photography studio, and it's a binder this thick full of pictures they took in one day. And what happens, they're just continuously shooting pictures. It's just like that all day long. And so some of them didn't look so good. I mean,
yeah,
some where they're look, like, almost
yeah.
turning her head, not having a good photo. He said, this is what they do in the media. He said, so
Hmm.
they find somebody they're against, usually a conservative. They find they'll take tons of pictures and pick out the weird ones and put
Yeah,
those out there. And I said, that is true. That is
yeah.
absolutely true. So I want to ask you this because I'm just going to tell you, I am not going to vote for a Democrat, but there are some Republicans I'm not going to vote for as well. What are your
Hmm.
thoughts on a third party? Is this the timing for one to actually emerge? A
I
lot of
think,
folks like me out there.
yeah, I think it's unlikely that it will happen. I think more likely is you'll see a transformation of the Republican Party, especially as people like uh, Richard Shelby, Mitch McConnell start retiring. If you see more of that, even someone like Ben Sass is going to go and become the new president of the University of Florida, and I don't know who's going to replace him. I don't know the politics there well enough to tell you, but I think you'll see more people of the character of Mike Lee, Ted Cruz coming in. If DeSantis becomes the new standard bearer of the Republican Party, I think you'll see people sort of try to conform to that image, and you'll see a very different Republican Party. I think that's more likely than maybe a wholesale new party emerging. The other thing is you see the Democrats becoming more like Ocasio Cortez and more progressive, more like Bernie. And so, the parties are becoming even increasingly more polarized. And
Mhm.
I don't know what that means for the future other than eventually I wouldn't be surprised if not in my lifetime, in my children's lifetime, we start seeing the geographical boundaries of the United States changing because
Mhm.
people are just incapable of living together. And someone from Alabama doesn't want someone from Washington State or Maine dictating how they live their lives.
Mhm. Yeah, but let's take a scenario. So let's just we'll not even mention Trump. Let's just say DeSantis says, you know what? I've had enough of the Republicans. This is not my Republican Party anymore, and he decides to run on an independent ticket.
Hmm.
Do you think that could stir the pot just a bit to
Oh, it would
bringing in a
certainly
third party?
it would certainly stir the pot. It would certainly stir the pot. I mean, the closest we've seen in our lifetime was Ross Perot.
I voted for
But
him, by the
he, I
way.
mean, that was the closest we've seen to sort of a third party surge. But I don't know, Donna. I mean, I did not think Trump was going to be able to pull it out. And when he ran in the primaries, 2015, 2016, like it seemed so improbable. And every time he started winning a primary, you're like, this is unbelievable. I can't believe what I'm seeing. This is like, I can't believe he's winning. And then he won, and it was like, wow, I can't believe he just won the primary. And then a lot of people thought, well, that's it. The Republicans are going to lose the election. And then he won the election. It was like, oh my gosh, like things can happen that people do not see coming. So who knows what's possible?
I think if Trump said, you know what, I'm going to run, but I'm fed up. Well, I'm very fed up with Democrats. I'm fed up with the Republican Party. I'm going to run independent. I think he'd win.
I mean, it would certainly be a jolt to the system. You just wonder
I
whether that
think we
would.
need a jolt to the system.
Well, we do need a jolt to the system. There's no doubt. And I thought that he was going to give that as a president, but it just showed you how entrenched the system is. That there's only so much that a president can do to undo a system that's so entrenched and that's been in place for so long and that has grown to such massive size and scale that it's hard to undo things.
Okay, so Biden has put a bunch of IRS agents boots on the
Yeah.
ground. So let's say Trump comes in as president, he's elected again. Could he do something about that?
Well, yes and no. I mean, once people become federal employees and they've been federal employees for a certain amount of time, it's hard to fire people. It's hard to let them go without cause and without all these reasons and
But could
without.
he change the direction of what they're because they're going to go in a particular direction. We know that.
They are. And what's so frightening and why the Democrats have such an advantage long term is that it's hard to put the genie back in the bottle, so to speak. When you add an administrative agency, like I don't think the Department of Education should exist at all, should never have been created. But once it's created, can you now just snap it away? You can't. It's hard to undo those things. So the more government you add, the harder it is to take things away and the harder it is to change. So the Democrats have sort of ensured this institutional mobility for their cause by populating their agencies with bureaucrats who favor their politics, and they're there as long as they want to be virtually. And a
I'll
new
tell you how you
administration.
can turn this whole thing around. Trump comes in, independent party. Trump decides to go either flat tax or fair tax. That would get rid of all this mess.
Well, we have to do. I mean, a change to the tax system, changes to Social Security. I mean, these things are all inevitable. They have to happen because
Mhm.
the system's not going to function in 20 years if it continues on the course
But
it's
it's
going.
not going to function in 20 years the way it is either. I mean,
No, that's what I mean. It's not.
something
It
has
can't.
got to happen.
There's got to be a change. So,
Mhm.
most of these politicians just sort of think so short term, and they're like, well, I won't be in office then anyway, so it's not my problem, or I'll be
They,
retired by
they
then.
think that's what most of it is. Okay, less than a
Yeah.
minute now before the show is over. How can folks find your books, your writings, more info about
Well,
you?
yeah, my website is www.alanmendenhall.com, and that's probably the easiest place. You can find writings, you can find media appearances, books, all of that there.
Absolutely. Alan, thank you again so much for being on the show today. It's always a pleasure.
Thanks, Donna. I really appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. You take care. We'll go ahead and put this little picture up here of you. I love it. I'm so
I
proud of
love
you,
it.
Alan.
Thank you.
Okay, folks, again, thank you so much for watching. And you can find us on television a couple different ways. Channel 182 on Charter Communications. You can also find us on Abundant TV, found on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire, and Australia. Thank you so much for letting us into your home. We definitely appreciate that. Bye, Alan. You take
Bye,
care.
Donna. You too.